All right, so what we're gonna do now that we kind of got the recording going is I'm inside that scene. I got the scraper selected, still in 3 key. I'm gonna put that in the folder that I created as an FBX file. So painter, scraper, call this scraper, and we're just gonna export that out. So it looks like it worked, right? You can see the little message at the bottom, result, exported the scraper, .fbx. Now I'm gonna go into Painter and we're gonna bring this in as our new project. Oh, there's a new update with Painter that some of you guys might have been noticing if you opened it up today. It's probably flagging you for that immediately. I'm not doing it yet, just in case there's something weird going on, because I don't want it to break and kind of affect any of my previously created materials. If you guys did update, it's probably still fine. I'm just playing it safe right now, so I don't end up butchering anything with the lectures. But if you guys want to update to the new Painter, it should be totally okay. So File, New, okay, PBR, Metallic Roughness, just like before. Now I'm going to choose the mesh that I exported out. So there's my little scraper FBX file. Great. DirectX, 2048, same deal as before. Now I'm going to hit OK and bring this in. Let's see what happens. Can you already spot the issue? Right. It is hard-edged, right? And now inside of Maya, it thinks that this is the scraper. And this is really what the scraper looks like. But in Maya, I know sometimes when we're doing a model, we're not just smoothing it. We kind of like using that little 3 key to do that little subdivision trick. It's the same thing as smoothing it. 3 key just means that it's only really smoothing it at render time. But technically, it still is like the low poly version. Well, I guess low poly. It's not really that low poly. Now, the issue here is when you bring it into Painter, you're clearly not getting the same accurate result that you're having in Maya. Now, you could still work with this and still go through the project, but to me, like when I'm going to start looking at the way lights are reacting, I really do want to see the smoother version, because that's going to be kind of misleading if it's all hard-edged and kind of chunky looking. So this means what we need to do is back here, even though you are going to leave your scraper in 3 key, like don't change that, I would recommend smoothing it just for the export. So just so when we go into Painter, we have the smoother version of the scraper. So if you want to play it safe, just so you don't kind of permanently, overwrite this one, I guess you could even like duplicate it if you wanted to. Leave this one in 3 key, but on the duplicate, go back to 1. And do you know what the equivalent is of a 3 key? Like what that means in smoothing?
Is it smoothing 3 times?
Twice, but yeah, close. So it's a 2 division smooth. So I'm just going to go to the mesh, smooth options, make sure it's set to exponentially. And you can either hit this button twice to do a single level smooth, 2 different times, or if you want, just go to 2, smooth. There it is. So this right here with 2 smooth divisions is the exact same thing as the 3 key. And you can tell they look really, really similar. So those are the same thing. This is what we're going to use in Painter. Now, even when we're done with the Painter project, when you're finished, it's obviously still going to apply to this one. You're not going to use the smooth scraper version in your scene. I mean, if you want to, I guess it's okay, but you don't really need to. So you're going to export your maps out, and you're applying it to this guy. Because the UVs should still look identical. Like nothing should have changed between their UVs. So, I mean, it's denser, obviously, but if you just look at like the shape, you can tell it's still the same information. It's just a denser mesh, that's it. So that would then go into Painter, and I'll just kind of show you this real quick, I guess. So we'll do New. Don't save. Let's try this again. Oh, it'd help if I exported it. Click on this guy. We'll export this out. I'm just going to overwrite the previous one. And let's try this again. Okay, and bringing it in. You can tell, great, now we have the smoother scraper. And I'd feel pretty comfortable at this point running through there and trying to create a bunch of the different details. Okay, do you guys have any questions about that part? It's pretty easy. It mentions that in the documentation. It's kind of at the beginning. Now, aside from that, The thing that's going to be a little different about the scraper compared to some of the other ones is there's going to be a lot of really specific small details you're trying to put in here. Because primarily, I mean, I know the book was a little different because it was like a tutorial where I was just running through the gauntlet of everything in Painter in one day. But like with the wall and like the shelf, most of you guys were probably just doing like a lot of fill layers and procedurals just to kind of keep adding in these sort of blankets of dirt and dust and, you know, paint splatters everywhere. The scraper, though, has like text. There's like individual paint splatters on very specific parts of the handle you want to get. So it's going to take a little bit more refinement than the shelf or the wall. Yes, question?
Like the book and the shelf, should we like assign like default materials to the pages?
What do you, say it again?
Should we assign like default materials to the scraper and pulley for when we export it to paint?
It doesn't really matter for this one. You can just leave it, because right now, like, it probably has like that render man material on it in your scene, and it just keeps giving you a warning. There's probably not really a new material on it. So I would just leave it, and when you import that in Painter, you're going to end up with one texture set, and that should be fine. The only reason why you guys may want to, actually, do you guys know why you would maybe assign different materials to the scraper prior to exporting?
Oh, you're going in the same project.
Yeah. Yeah, this really just comes down to like your personal preference and like the control you guys like. So, I mean, I feel pretty confident that like I could do the whole thing with one material and not really have to control that. But if you felt like it was easier to have like one texture set of material for the metal pieces, a different one for the plastic handle, that is something you can totally do. The only difference is when you do the export is inside of Maya, you would need to physically assign a different material to the different pieces. Like put, you know, Lambert 1 on the handle, make a new Lambert, put that on all the metal pieces, and then combine those together, and then just export them out together. And that would give you two different texture sets in here, which means you could hop back and forth between the handle and the scraper. I don't think it's necessary, but I'm fine if you guys want to do that. It's the same thing we did with the wall and the shelf, because those were two different materials, and when you guys brought them in, you could see both of them at the same time inside of Painter. All right. So aside from that, you know, I don't really want to do too much with the scraper. I'm going to let you guys do that in the lab. I'm going to hop back to the box and the wooden pulley that I was doing previously. We're going to go back to this guy with my sweet tape on the box. Okay. So I think we're going to talk about some procedural stacking first before I kind of get into some of like the projection tricks. So this is the part where Painter can get really, really deep, is when you start stacking lots of different procedurals and like masks together. So we're going to kind of run through a few different scenarios here and try to build this. So, for example, on this guy. So when I was working on this previously, like it's okay, you know, but I think like the cracks are just a little too big. It's very boring looking. It almost kind of feels like a wood texture you'd see in like a stylized video game. It doesn't really feel like photorealistic wood right now because it's very like chunky and kind of large looking. So I'm going to change a few things here and stack a bunch of other effects into it. So now you'll notice that at the moment, my material that I'm seeing is the box, right? Now when you guys have been going back and forth between these, which is fine, like you can kind of click on it, click on this guy, go over here, it'll now show you the material for the wooden pulley. But there actually are shortcuts where you can kind of click between these without constantly going into your texture set and going back and forth. So if I do, oops, if I can get to, oh, not that one. Come on, you can do it. There we go. If you do Option, Command, right click, so I have two different materials. Option, Command, right click. is a shortcut to basically hop back and forth between your texture sets on different objects. That's really useful if you have a bunch of things in the same painter file. All right, so back on this guy, inside of the group, how I set this up before is I have a bunch of fill layers sitting on top of a wood preset. So I have this green stain. I can kind of turn that off for a second. Let's also hide the box so it's a little quicker. And I have the crack detail. This is really the one that I want to work on and refine a little bit more. So I'm going to click on the mask. And inside of here, you can see I've done two different things. I have this kind of very generic grunge map, which is just a procedural on a fill layer. That's just kind of giving me some just basic height detail. If I option left click on it, you can see what it looks like. Like that's my mask for that one. And I also have a fill above it, which is kind of adding in secondary details. Now we're going to push this a little farther and try to add even more information to this thing. And I'll kind of be asking you guys some questions as I'm going through this to see if we can figure out how to get this to work. So let's say that we want to add in even more cracks, but way smaller, like higher frequency detail. I'm going to still go to the procedurals. We'll kind of look through here. Were there any like specific procedurals you guys used before that you thought were pretty good for something like this? I know there's a bunch. I know. You're just kind of like clicking through them, seeing if any of these might work. So I'm just looking for something that has decent line detail. Which one? Grunge leaks. This one? Maybe? Yeah, that could definitely work. This one would be kind of cool because I could maybe use this to get some staining like under the bolts. Let's back up. Let's do. I don't think we had anything under cracks. We had a couple like plaster. This might have been the same one I used previously. Let me double check that. That was 005. I'm going to try this one out, just kind of see what happens. This might be kind of interesting. So I got this one called Grunge Plaster Cracked. Now, I could just blanket this thing as a fill layer again. So let's try that. On the mask, I'm going to go up here to the effect. We're going to add a fill. And again, what does a fill do? Every time you add a fill effect, what is that doing to the alpha or that mask that we're building? Yeah, it's just like a coat of paint, right? It covers everything there. So you'll notice that this fill, once again, is hiding everything we saw previously. Now, when I click on that fill, you can see it's grayscale, right? It's just a value at the moment. You can pick whatever I want. I'm going to grab this Grunge Plaster Cracked and just move it over here. And you can see this is kind of a cool looking texture. I have some cracks running vertically. Maybe it looks cool, but we'll kind of see. How do I get this to blend with this guy? Like what I'm trying, like if you're thinking and you kind of visualize what this mask should look like, shouldn't it look like there's almost smaller white cracks kind of everywhere in addition to what we already have? And look at the mask that we're currently seeing, if that's on. Yeah, we got to do something with the blend mode, and we're getting black cracks currently. Right. So we know that we want white cracks. So that's what we had previously, correct? So let's look at this right here. I got the fill. There's the procedural. I'm going to go down. This has an invert option on it. Fantastic. Now I'm going to invert it. Okay, we're getting somewhere. It's flipped. Now it's still covering it. What's my next problem? Yeah, it's something with a blend mode. So there's a couple that I've kind of referenced before that are really important. Normal is going to cover it. And yeah, I could fade it out. Like I could take opacity and like fade it so I get this weird kind of 50-50 blend. Like maybe that would look okay. Now if I go to multiply, let's watch what happens. Yeah, so this is only making what we had darker. Now this could still be kind of cool in some cases because it almost looks like right now when I do that, I have these like interesting, almost like gouges kind of in the wood. And there might be a purpose for that. So I'm not really hating it. But let's kind of go back.
Go to the tab and only select height if you only want cracks.
Oh, like if I only want height information? Yeah, so that would be an issue with like on the color part. I could disable the roughness and the color on that. So I don't really mind. Like, this is actually mostly height right now anyway. The base color is pretty subtle. But let me kind of option click back on this guy. What about min, max, and add? So these are also really important. So addition, let's kind of look at that one. This is addition. Now this is adding that on top of it. This is a lot closer. But I want to show you some small potential differences here and why this may be, a good or potentially a bad thing. So let me turn this off for a second. Look at, so see how this is kind of like a flat part that would push inward right here? When I add this into it with linear dodge, just adding the value, see how like there's more detail in that area now? It's not just a flat color. There's a secondary layer of a brighter white that's layering on it. Now if I look at it, you can see that in the crack, there's like secondary cracks built into that. Okay, now if I go back here, the other one that sometimes we'll use is this one called max. This is really similar to addition. And I don't know if we're going to see much of a difference here in this case. Well, actually, we are. Look at max. Max lighten. What would you say is the main kind of change here between this and that?
It's like taking the values of product and overlapping them. So if the streaks in one of the fills is lighter, it's over.
Yes.
The other one is lighter, but it's also not as light, so it's not as thin, it's not going to dig as much.
Right, right.
I want to get more like thresholds.
Yeah, it's similar to that, yeah. Yeah, throwing out threshold. Good terminology there. All right. So I'll kind of like show you guys like in math. Hooray, math. Kind of why this works the way it does. So let's say you have a layer where there's a value of gray, like midtone gray at 0.5. Okay? And then we're talking about adding another layer above it that has another value of 0.5. When you add those together, what is the result you think we're going to get? Right, they're going to add together and get 1. So if I go back to addition, that's kind of what's happening right now. It's adding those white and gray colors together, and it just keeps getting brighter and brighter and brighter. If I go back to here and do max, this is different. What max does is it looks at all the colors in the different layers, and it only allows the max value of either layer to show through. Meaning, like the main kind of change here would be if you had parts of the texture that were like 0.1, I'll pretend this is like 0.2 to something like that. What's probably going to happen if I do a max is it's not going to just simply add these ranges together. It's going to pick the brightest value, and that's the answer. It's picking the max luminance out of the two different layers. So when you kind of look at this area, if I go back to max, it's actually causing this clipping effect. It looks a little weird with the gray because I faded the opacity out of it on this guy. But it's basically looking at the value of the layers, and it's not allowing anything to go above the highest value between everything. So it's a really good way to prevent things from clipping and getting into like brighter and brighter constant values. Now, like artistically, when you kind of look at the result, like I don't really know if this is better or worse. It's kind of made some flat spots in here, but I almost have like a defined crack kind of running through it, as opposed to before when it was just doing addition. There's a lot of like other secondary details kind of showing up. Out of the two, which one do you kind of like? Yeah. It kind of depends on like what the reference is showing you and kind of what you're going for, but I'm kind of preferring this one, I think, like over the flatter details for this. So I might leave it as like linear dodge and just keep that the same. So that's like just adding different elements together with either addition or max lighten. Now, what if I want to remove areas? Okay, so sometimes we'll do a procedural like this, and there's going to be parts where, when you're doing a fill layer, it's just covering the whole model, and you don't want to do that. You want to start removing sections. So looking at this right here, how do I now take out pieces from the cracks? without like, I could hand paint. There's a bunch of ways to do it. Let's try the hand painted method first. Let's just pretend, for the sake of argument right now, that this piece of wood in the middle right here, this guy, you don't want to see any of those cracks we built on there. Because maybe you're doing a completely different set of cracks for that one section. So I want to remove all the crack detail from this piece. How do I do that?
You go to the fill layer and you paint black over that whole.
Yeah. I could basically what it comes down to is like, so if I use the eraser, which is over here, which is still correct, the eraser only works if I was on a paint layer. Like if you'd hand painted something, just like you would in Photoshop, you can go in there and erase it and it'll disappear. This is a little different though, because you'll notice all the icons over here are not showing these are paint layers. These are just fill layers. So I actually really can't even erase that. It's just kind of the way it is. Like if I click on it, you'll notice, oh, it doesn't even let you click on the button. That's kind of a sign that this is not going to work. But I think, Norman, you said doing like black as like a fill on top of it or something, right?
Paint over all the white,
Yeah. I could just put black over that. So this is where we could use a paint layer, because we've had to do this a couple times. So I'm going to add so under the same mask, we're going to go up here to Effect, add Paint. I'm going to remove this. And I think one of the best ways to do it, because we kind of saw how this is broken up in UVs, I believe that guy right there is that piece that we're kind of concerned about. I could use the polygon fill, right? So on a paint layer, polygon fill, and before we were using the little UV chunk fill, which is kind of convenient. This is all dependent on how you UV'd the model. But I'm going to go to UV chunk. It's set to white. We're talking about it being black, right, in this area. Move it to black. Click. It's gone. So if I go back here, should have updated. Oh, that's not the whole model. That's only part of it. So there is another piece I have to do in this case. That is also part of it. So same thing, I'm on the paint layer, still on it, UV chunk, click, and there it is. I've completely removed that just by painting that in that area. You can tell it's gone. Okay. Now, what if I also wanted to have the same kind of crack and detail we're doing here affect the edging? What if there's an edging effect? What are some ways to force this to happen in a specific area like that? Yeah. Using the curvature map, right? And anytime we want to use the curvature detail, like where the geometry bevels and bends, that's where the generators come in. So generators are going to automate placement on the corners, or maybe where you have like contact detail between pieces. So let's kind of look at the mask again. I'm going to option click on it. Okay. Now, if I want to have more rough kind of crack detail on the edge, what I'm expecting is more of that white in here, right? Just finer details of white cracks and breakup all on the corner. So to do this, we're going to go here. And this could be above this or underneath it. It doesn't really matter, but we'll go in. I'm going to click it. We're going to add a generator. Okay. Nothing's happening yet. Generator effects there. I'm now going to click. And we have a couple options here. I've got dirt, dripping rust. Metal edge wear is really good though, even though we're not doing metal, because this is still essentially one of the generators that just looks at edge erosion, and it'll do something with that. And you can tweak this quite a bit. It doesn't have to look like metal. It's just generating an alpha. So we're going to use metal edge wear for wood, which makes a lot of sense, I guess. So metal edge wear. Now it's on there, and as soon as I did that, it's completely removed everything else we saw before, right? Because again, it's like a coat of paint. It's always going to default to a normal blend mode. It covers what's beneath it. So let's go back, look at the color. We have some really interesting kind of rough details on the edge. This is looking a little weird right here for me. Like that's like a very strange, harsh edge it's kind of creating due to this. So maybe I'll break it up a little bit. You know, I can click on it. Because I picked that generator, there's a ton of different options. I know you guys were playing around with this quite a bit when you were doing the wood, like on the corners. Did you guys use it at all you did on the book too, probably, right? Some of you for like to remove the leather. The shelf, yeah, ton of that on that guy. I'm going to break this up a little bit so it's not kind of so flat, because that's not really what should be happening here. So there's not really any kind of trick to it. You just got to move the sliders around and just get a feel for what's going on. So the big one for this, I believe, is going to be my curvature weight. So the curvature weight is kind of what's forcing this to kind of really be much more isolated to the edge. I don't need it to be that extreme. So I'm going to bring down my curvature weight. I might look at the occlusion as well and just see what's that doing. This is kind of adding detail like in the corners. Occlusion is like where geometry gets close to each other, like contact shadows. So if I look at the occlusion, you can kind of see it's controlling where those two guys meet up. I'll leave that down. I just want to get more kind of overall regularity. So I might just try increasing the grunge amount. This just kind of peppers it everywhere. We'll do that and maybe just increase the wear level a little bit. You know, let's,
Kind of randomness on this, like the seeding generator. Hey.
there is, yeah, man. So a lot of these guys have that seed built into it. And this probably still looks okay, and I don't know if it's going to change much, but if I wanted to, if there's something that bothered you about the procedural, you could just go in there, hit that, and it just updates to a slightly different version. I mean, they're both very similar, but you can kind of click through them sometimes, and you might get lucky and something interesting happens. So I think this looks okay. Still a little weird in that one spot, but overall not too bad. Now, if I go back here and look at it, I'm kind of digging some of the effects we're getting. It almost looks like scratches are now in the pulley, so I'm not really hating that. But let's look at the mask again. How do I bring back those details we had before? Yeah, it's really just probably between add or max, right? You just get to see which one you like. And instead of me just like looking at the mask, I'm just going to look at the color, and let's just change the mask blend mode and just look at it in the viewer. You don't always have to look at the black and white information. Okay, so we'll go here. Here is addition. I can turn the visibility on and off. You can kind of see what it's doing. Not bad. And here is max. You can tell there's not that much of a difference. It's just a little more subtle in some areas. So I really don't have any preference out of those. I think they both work fairly well. Now there is one small issue happening. I'm kind of glad this happened. Remember how earlier, like there's a lot of cases where you're trying to remove details from a part, and look what happened to this area. Remember how we just blacked that out a second ago, right? We did that little fill, or the UV chunk fill with the paintbrush and just like threw black on it. Why is this now affecting it? Yes, it's a layer order, right? So just like Photoshop and every other layer-based editor you guys have ever used, this is now sitting on top of the black. So it does, as far as Painter knows, it's supposed to do that. So how do I very quickly fix this? Just move that paint to the top, right? If I change the layer, or I could do another fill and do it again and put another layer and put black on it to once again paint over it. But if I know that this should always be black, I can just simply select that little layer right there for the effect, drag it up to put it above it, and you can see now it trumps it, and now we're back to like a nice clean part in the middle. Okay, let's try this again, and this time I'll use like a brush, and we'll do like one more effect possibly. But we're going to keep adding into this guy. I'm going to use the brush to remove a piece, just to break it up, because maybe some of these lines are a little too perfect. Okay, so we'll go over here, we're going to brushes, go click on the mask. Now, as soon as I do a brush, I'm talking about needing a paint layer, right? Because I'm hand painting something. This is not just a procedural. So go to the mask, go up. We're going to click on paint. The layer order might not matter for this one, because as long as I don't physically paint here, it's not going to really affect it. But if we're want to play it safe, I could just drag it below it. And I could also rename this too, because I kind of want to remember this is the one that's like filling that with black. I'll call this black fill, which you cannot read at all. Let's go back here. Okay. Let's look for maybe an interesting brush. This one's kind of cool. This is a mold brush. This one has some interesting shapes to it. I use this on the scraper handle, actually, at a few different spots for like paint splatters. Let's do one that's a little bit more broken up. This one's kind of interesting just because like of the texture of it. So I've used this before. Anytime I have areas where it just seems too flat, and you're just trying to add this very generic kind of cloudiness to like break anything up that looks too clean, this guy's pretty useful. So I'm going to click on it, and you can see, because I'm on my brush tool, it's waiting for me to paint. And under the paint settings, oh, and there's my screensaver. Okay, we'll go back here. There's a ton of stuff in here. Size, flow, opacity. I think the brush tools are going to be one of the hardest parts you guys battle, just understanding the hotkeys, like using command and like right-click, left and right-click up and down for like thickness to it, command left-click, up and down for rotation, left click side to side. So it's always with the command key though. It's just command and your left and right mouse buttons. Okay, so we'll kind of bring it up a little bit, and I can just lightly tap in a few areas and just see what happens. Now, actually, what am I even going to paint first off? Let's go way down to the bottom. You can see, okay, there's the brush. I'm painting black, which means anywhere I paint, it's going to remove the data, right? We're removing white because I'm painting black on top of it. So if I click, this might be really subtle. Oh, I'm not even on the paint layer. That'd be helpful. Let's actually go back to this guy. Be careful about that because I have a habit of doing this a lot myself where I'll click off the layer by mistake and it doesn't paint. Just click back on your layer. And if I paint, there we go. Okay, so I'm now just adding little bits of breakup. I can kind of bring it down and go in there and start like fine-tuning sections. And I could also just look at the image, not look at the mask, and just kind of hand paint some of this stuff. You can see I'm just removing data. So I'll go over here. Maybe this area right here is a little too thick and chunky. I can start removing and painting that away. So I'm just fixing any of the really weird, super flat lines from that procedural. Like that. That looks great right there. Let's just break that up. Okay. So you guys probably feel pretty good about like the different blend modes, kind of how those work. You're just adding or subtracting information out to kind of hide and show all the different areas you want. Okay. Let's do some stencils. I'll show you this. All right, I'm going to bring, which I guess we could do it with this guy. Well, maybe we'll do like a couple paint splatters or something on it. So let's say that we want to add some details, and you guys have used stencils before. It sounds like in ZBrush, where you kind of have that gray overlay, you just kind of paint over a texture. I really like using stencils quite a bit, just because to me it's so easy to start blanketing a lot of the canvas with a lot of really cool texture variation. Now, there's a couple ways to do stencil effects. You can either just, find a procedural in here and just move it around and kind of paint, or you could also potentially go online, find some other texture you like, and then use that as your stencil. We'll kind of try it two different ways. So if I wanted to add paint, we'll kind of start with that. I'm going to get a new folder in here. So I have this group specifically for the wood. And I want to decide right now, is the paint going to be something that's only on the wood, or does it overlap with both areas? Does it cover everything? What do you guys want to do? Overlap? Okay, so we're going to say in this case, maybe based on reference, they want us to have paint splatters, and some of them do kind of cross over both areas. So I want to make sure that when I build the paint, it is not within this group, because if I do that, it will never appear on the rust. And also I don't want to have it in the rust group, because that means it won't be on the wood. So we're now talking about this being a completely new group above everything. So we're going to make a folder. We'll call this paint group, I guess. Now within here, I'm going to make a fill layer. I love starting with fill layers. Oh, you can see it's not in the group. Let's drop that in there. There we go. So I have a fill layer. And this is eventually going to be our paint. I'm going to come down here and immediately start turning things off and figuring what should be there for the paint effect that we're doing. Metallic. No, it's not metallic. I hardly ever use normal as anything, because that's the only time you really use normal over here is if you're working with, you can like export and create these kind of normal map textures. You can get these out of ZBrush too. If you have a normal map texture you're using, like that looks like this, that's the only time you use normal. Typically, you're just using height to go up and down and just let Painter deal with that. So we're going to take normal off. Roughness, height, and color, though, I think are pretty important. I might make the paint kind of shiny. Now, one thing I'm kind of noticing already is, let's say we're doing, actually, I kind of like the gray color we're getting right here. Might stick with this. We'll do something like that. So I have like the color working. The roughness seems to be okay. I'm kind of all right with it being sort of low. What's going on with the height that we've seen before? It's like absorbing the height from what's beneath it. And you guys ran into this probably numerous times during the previous projects. Because by default, what's happening, if you go, look at the height layers. This gets really confusing, like remembering which material property you're looking at. Go to the height, and remember how height is always set to linear dodge, and we've seen what that is before. Linear dodge is addition. It keeps adding height data together. If I want the paint to cover that height, because the paint needs its own height, it should not have anything to do with the wood. It's just a blob sitting on top of it. What should this be sent to? Normal. Now, because I'm doing this in a group, I'm going to go to the group, because watch what happens if I change it here. Even though it looks like I'm doing it right, you can see nothing's changing. This will change how that would combine the height with a fill layer below it. But the problem in this case is the overall group is what needs to be set to normal. And as long as you just kind of look at the model and click between them, you'll very quickly figure out which one's the problem. So go to the group, normal, it covers it. Now I can probably go in there and start making the mask to isolate this effect. So I've got this group selected. I'm going to add a black mask to it. Okay, so the fill layer's completely disappeared. There's no information on the alpha, completely solid. On this, we are going to add a paint effect to it. Okay, now I do not want to go in there and hand paint some of this stuff. Like, I mean, I could do it, but I'm going to use a stencil instead. So stencils are really cool when you start using procedural effects for any of these grunge maps, which are also in their own section. So we'll go to grunges, and I'm going to look for one that has pretty cool looking like splatter detail. Let's see what we got. So I do splatter, nothing shows up. Oh, this guy. And we're saving. Grunge stained spots. That one's pretty slick. And I bet a lot of these have random seeds where I could just kind of click through them a couple times to get different variations. Grunge spots there. I like this one. This one's pretty cool. So I want to use this as a stencil, and I'm on the brush. Now, when you look at the brush settings, we've kind of been skimming over this. A lot of you guys have seen the stencil area just as you've been kind of going through the different properties for the brush. What I'm going to do is drag this to the stencil. So we're going to drag Grunge Spots Dirty to here. And this is looking very similar to your whole ZBrush thing you've seen. Like as soon as I did that, and this may look different for you if you haven't done this before, because there's a couple settings on how the stencil is visible. But I've dropped it in there, and you can see there's this very big blanket of that procedural covering everything. When I move the camera around, see how it's locked to the camera? Okay. Let's kind of play around with some of the display settings. I'll show you how to control this a little easier. Because like the grunge is cool, and you know when you use it with a stencil, it's fine. But it's a little annoying occasionally when it's covering so much of the model you can't even see what the hell is happening. So to change this, we're going to go into our display settings. Now you guys have been in here before because this is where I was showing you how you can change like environment opacity if you want to see the background, blurring it, changing the exposure. That's not really what I'm doing now. I'm going to go down all the way to pretty much the bottom, and you'll see there's an area under Tool Display. Hide Stencil when painting. Stencil Opacity. So the opacity is you seeing the stencil effect, and I would not recommend keeping it like this. You're basically painting blind at that point. So you might want to leave it kind of low. You could turn it off if you want to, but like I kind of like to have a little bit of a fade there. And there's a checkbox above it. I'm not sure what this is set to for you guys by default. Is that on or off? Yeah, it's under display. It might be on or off, I think, by default. Basically, like if I paint, it's not going to remove the stencil. Because usually what I like to do is when you line it up in the right spot, when I paint, I want it to disappear and just let me paint. Because all I'm using the stencil for is just to line it up in the right spot. It's on by default. Okay. If it is, that means as soon as I paint, you'll see the stencil disappears and I can paint directly on the model. I'll kind of leave it like this. Now, the next step is going to be, how do we move the stencil around? Okay, this involves the S key. S for stencil. So if you hold down S, see how like when I do that, this little control box is popping up? You can also reset. If you ever like mess up the alignment, you can hit the reset button and it'll kind of pop back. Let me try to do that real quick. There we go. It'll kind of reset it. So that's like a nice fix just in case you do something weird with it. But the basic idea with this is when you hold down S and you can see that box pop up, you'll notice all the hotkeys are showing up in the bottom left corner. It just wants you to use your left, middle, and right mouse buttons. So left click is rotation. If you hold, anytime you add shift with rotation, see how it snaps? It's like doing 90-degree rotation. Or if you don't like the snapping, you can just not do shift and just S, left click, and drag. Here's S with middle mouse. Translation. And S right mouse is the zoom. But collectively between like rotation, translation, and zoom, I mean, you basically have all the controls you need to line this thing up in the right spot. And it is going to tile like infinitely. Not a big deal because I'm only going to paint where I need it, so I'm not too concerned about that. So maybe what I'll do is I'm just going to kind of move up here. I'm going to hold S. I'm going to make mine a little bit bigger, I think, and try to get like some of these little interesting white splatters to be maybe near the top. Like we'll come to the top here. I kind of like this guy also hanging off the edge. So I got it in a pretty good spot. I'm going to hold down Command, and I'm still playing around with the brush. Now my brush probably still has another alpha built into it. So I have like a this grunge spotty stencil that's now being painted with another alpha dirt brush. I probably don't want to like overcomplicate it with like dirt brushes with dirt stencils. I mean, you can do that. So what I'm going to do is just go back to my brushes and I'm going to switch back to basic hard or basic soft, which are kind of your default, just generic circular brushes. We'll do basic soft. Okay, and I'm going to zoom in a little closer, hit S, scale this up. And if I paint, I'm painting white. Let's see what happens. I'm basically painting splatters all over this thing. Now the cool thing about this is, because it's all coming from the stencil, I can keep the camera in the same spot. Let's say I want to add in more small, fine detail in here. Hold S. Let's scale it down a lot. Just kind of move it. And now I can just kind of lightly tap and start adding in like a couple other random little splatters. I'm just moving this around and just kind of painting over interesting spots that I think I want to capture. You can tell it's already kind of working. You can go down here. If I ever want to swap it out, because I'm still on that paint layer, here's the stencil. Let's go find a different one. Let's go to Grunges. There's a couple other ones. This one is like a fan favorite. I've used this so many times now. I bet a bunch of you guys found this when you're doing like the shelf and or the book and you're doing like stains on the fabric. So this is Grunge Map 004. It's been in Painter and Designer for a long time. So we're going to use this guy. So I'm going to go to my stencil. There it is. Grunge Match or Grunge Spots Dirty. Let's just drag this one to it. You can see, just give it a second, it's updated. Right now we have a new one. Now this one's not too bad. This is a little, if you kind of look at the detail, this is more of like a water stain looking effect. So I could change the stencil. So how do I know what the stencil looks like? And actually, let me line up a couple spots here real quick. Like look at this guy, oh, right there, where I'm kind of moving my mouse. See how there's kind of like a lot of gray color in the middle? It's like a gradient. When I paint it, it's not too bad, but it's sometimes when you paint on these like partially transparent stencils, it'll look like it's fading in certain areas. You can still tweak the stencil's opacity, color, and contrast. Because if you look down in the corner here, it's not just a stencil that's connected. You have all the same controls that are built into the procedural. So if I want to really see what this looks like, what I could do is go back in my display settings. Let's just crank this opacity up really high so I can see it. This is the procedural. And if I want to do something much more harsh, like very black and white, I'm just going to crank the hell out of the contrast. Let's bring this up. Way harsher shapes. Let's kind of bring that down a little bit. And I could bring the balance down if I want to start removing some of those pieces. Takes a little experimenting. So maybe something like this, so I can get some kind of interesting like ringed outline detail from like the remnants of a splatter that's kind of chipped away. So I'm just playing around with contrast. We're going to go back. Let's go to my display, fade it out again so I can see the model. And we'll add maybe a couple of those guys over here. And I'm going to create some overlap, I think, with some of the metal pieces. So I'm going to hold S. We'll kind of move it. We'll grab maybe these guys right here. Okay, and we'll just paint. You can see it's going right over top of everything because, again, that layer is above everything. So it's not just isolated to the rust. This is its own group that will cover anything on the model. Do you guys have any questions so far about how the stencils work? These are like, to me, like this is my favorite way to paint now. Like I'm all about the stencils. Like hand painting's fine for like in a pinch. We're just trying to do some quick brush up work. But I love the variation you can get from this guy. So let's try it again. Let's do like an imported resource this time. So we're going to go in here and we'll kind of find something. Have you guys ever looked for like random alphas before online for like some other project? I mean, there's a ton of stuff out there. Let's do paint splatter alpha. Now, if I go in here, we have a bunch of cool things that are popping up. A lot of these are almost like, yeah, kind of like a background. Some have these beautiful watermarks. Not that I'm very concerned about that. We can get clever with the watermarks. But a lot of these, you know, they don't really maybe work too well. Some of these could be interesting if you want just like a spray paint effect where there's like a dusting and like a mist of paint that's on stuff. But a lot of these also look very fake. Like they're just like a almost like vector graphic. So I'm not really feeling too many of these guys. Maybe we'll do, I'll just try this one just to see if it works. We're going to take the easy way out. Screen capture that. Now I want to bring this in as a resource. And we've kind of done this a few times. So how do I do that? Right here, right? Now, because I really want you guys to kind of focus on keeping your things organized, I'm going to go and move that thing into the same folder with all my other information. So I'm just kind of keeping any texture I've used with this that is related to the wooden pulley. I want it all in the same folder so I don't lose it. So I'm going to go into the lecture project under Painter. There's my wooden pulley thing. We've already done a couple of these before. I'm going to go to the desktop. There it is. Let me rename it real quick. Call it Paint Splatter 1. I'm just going to drop that in the same folder for the wooden pulley. So it's all in the same area as everything else. Now I'm going to go down here. We're going to go under Import Resources, down by the shelf. Hit that button. Add Resource. Let's back up. There's that wooden pulley. Okay. Paint Splatter 1. Open. Where does this type of thing go? This is an alpha. Yeah, alpha is going to be your black and white maps. I mean, you all know what alphas look like. Texture would be Anytime you're using like a color image, like if I did that with the shipping label, I think on the box. So we're going to do alpha.
What is color?
This is a color LUT is a color lookup table, and I actually haven't used them in Painter yet. So I don't know if have you used these yet, Shane? The color lookup table.
I know it.
I have not used this. Lookup table. You're going to actually get some information about that in Nuke. This is related to more of like balancing colors. So like if you went from like a Cineon film plate and you're trying to view that in a sRGB color space. Remember the stuff we were talking about with the CRT monitors lying to you? Like that. That is kind of getting back to like lookup tables. It's all about histograms, color balancing. I haven't used it in Painter yet, so I don't really have a lot of information on that. But we'll leave it as alpha. And down here for import resources, we're gonna click on it. I'm gonna pick the project wooden pulley box, not just the current session. So when I close out of this, it'd be nice if when I open it again, if that texture is still in there, just in case I want to reuse it. So we're gonna do the project. Import. There it is. You can see it's named exactly like it is in the directory. It's called Paint Splatter 1. It's under alpha, and there we go. So I'm going to drag this to the stencil. Okay. You can see it's immediately showing up, right? This is super easy. Let's hold S, and I could hit reset if it's moved around a little bit too much, but I'm going to middle mouse drag this, and let's try to put this in a different spot. I'll throw you guys a curveball, actually. What if I want this to be a different color? Yeah. Like if let's say you want to do this, and you want to put this paint splatter. Let me actually rotate it so it's like dripping downward. That makes sense. Because I want it to be like right about there, dripping off the edge. Okay, so good placement. Now if I paint, let's see what happens. Right. It's doing it, but it's the same color, it might not be a big deal, but what if I wanted that to be a different color? How do I get around that issue?
Maybe we add a hue effect to that later.
There are hue effects. Yeah, so there are ways to color correct certain areas. That gets a little deeper. Actually, I might show you guys some of that today. Has anyone actually been brave and hopped into the filters yet? So I remember you doing it because you were doing that HSL, I think, on something, right? Yeah. I'll show you guys these today. So the reason why this is not going to be a different color is because aren't I currently setting up everything on this one fill layer, right? Like we chose the color here. I'm ready for this to be a different color, which means I need a different fill layer with a different mask. I just need something different so I have the ability to change that color. So what I could do is I'm going to keep this. I'm going to rename this to Paint White Group. I have to make any sense. My English is terrible. Paint White, because that's how we talk. Let's try white paint. White paint group. Okay, I'm going to just right-click on this thing. Let's duplicate it to make it a little bit quicker. So duplicate that guy. You can see, great, we have now a copy of it. I'm going to rename this. We're going to call this red paint group. So it's going to be a red paint splatter. I'll turn off this other one here so we don't see it. Now, currently with the duplicate, this is the exact same, right? You can tell it's a complete copy, same white paint. Now I'm going to go in here, go to the fill. Let's change the color to whatever we think it should be. We'll do something like this, maybe desaturate it and darken it a little bit, like that. So I'm picking the right color, but because I duplicated it, doesn't that mean it's still using all the same masking information, right? Because we built that previously. How do I clear this out if I want to like reset it and do a new one from scratch?
So delete the paint layer.
Yeah, I got to get rid of that guy, right? Just remove this thing. So you could just click on the paint because this is where all the information's from. Hit the little X to remove it, and let's just add a new paint layer to it. And now, if I kind of go over here and kind of line that up right where I want it, okay, It's still there, my stencil. I'm just going to command right click to bring the brush up. Oh, and completely moves the camera. That's cool. There we go. And just paint that in there. Okay, let's click back. Let's turn on that guy. And now we have another paint effect in there. Let's try to refine this a little bit more though. Okay, so I have like a stencil working. It's there. What are some issues visually? Like if you, let's pretend we don't have reference. We're just going off your instincts here. What feels off about the way the paint is layering currently? Well, yeah, there is roughness, but it's like it's flat roughness, right? There's not any variation to it. And the height, like while it does kind of look like it works in some areas for the white, you can tell that there's pretty big problems though in this one area where it's like really, really flat.
Wouldn't it like slide if you take on whatever you want to use?
Potentially. So,
Or if it's like a thing?
that's a good question here. So on the fly, we're going to change this. This is no longer paint. This is now going to be someone getting sloppy and spilling wine on the wooden pulley. Okay? Paint covers it, right? Paint, it's an over. That's what it's currently doing. What does wine do when you throw wine or a liquid on a porous surface like wood? It soaks in, fades, and it stains it, right? You're changing the color of the wood to something different. It's not just covering it like paint. And we did this before. Do you guys remember how I can make this paint change the color of the wood beneath it?
Go into the properties and select everything. I mean, don't select anything but color.
So you're saying like in here? Oh, like turning off height and roughness. Yeah. So in this case, there wouldn't be any height adjustment, right? Because this is, again, soaking into it. You can see as soon as I've done that, like that's kind of going the right direction.
Then change the blending to tint.
Yeah, tint, color, multiply. Let's try it. I'm going to go to the group at the top. Let's try a couple of, I think you said tint, one of them.
You're in there.
Oh, thank you. And go into base color. So I'm on base color. We're going to go to the group, normal. Let's change it to tint. Yikes. This almost has like a bleaching effect. So we, by mistake, figured out how to make bleach happen. You make apparently red or white colors and put it to a tint, and you've got bleach. Well, that's good to know. Let's try color. Like, kinda. It is changing the color, but that feels like almost cartoony looking. It's not really what I'm going for. Usually, when you're dealing with a staining effect, you're darkening. It only gets darker. It's kind of like when you see. Anytime you've printed something, and so you're always printing on white paper because you're darkening and you're staining the white paper to a darker tone, like black ink or cyan, magenta, yellow ink. Yeah, multiply. Multiplication is great for anytime you're doing stains. That's multiply. So this almost, actually, it's kind of feeling almost like blood right now, just based on the color I picked. That was kind of a mistake, but we have that. It's not too bad. I want to fix maybe some, maybe a little bit of height variation if we're doing something like blood. I think what I also want to do with this, it'd be nice to break up the opacity. So it's not, if this was blood, I want to give it the effect where certain areas have been removed and kind of like just worn away over time. So to do that, it's because this is solid white, right? That was a great starting point. Maybe let's change that a little bit. So what I could do is, let's do it through a stencil again, since we're kind of on that route. I'm going to add another paint layer. We're going to look for some type of grunge that would be really good. I kind of want to have this lined detail to chip away at it. Actually, I kind of like this guy. This is concrete. It's not even really what I was looking for, but I'm just going to see what happens. I'm going to drag this grunge concrete, which we're using for blood on wood, which makes complete sense. We're going to take the grunge concrete, put that in the stencil. This is really big. Let's bring that up. Let's actually hit reset. There we go. I'm just kind of moving it around, and we'll do something like that. There we go. So I'm just kind of lining it up. Now I'm going to, right now when I paint, let's see what it does. Uh-oh. It's stacking that on top of it. Okay, now if I go to the brush and put it to black, that's closer, right? That's kind of what we were expecting. So what I'm gonna do is bring the brush up. Now when I paint, see how it's like, it's still painting super quick? It's like I barely brush stroke that thing and it's like immediately there. If I wanted to fade this in a little more gradually, what could I do to fix this problem where it's like, so it's not painting so harsh? Yeah, the low flow. So flow, we can bring that down. And I could use the slider at the top, or if I do command left click and back and forth, that does the same thing. So let's really fade this guy out with the flow so it's not nearly as touchy. I'm gonna go way down here. Low flow. See how it's a lot more faint? And I'm just gonna kind of lightly tap through here, and you can see we're getting some erosion now. Not too bad. Kind of interesting little effect. This is like Kool-Aid now. But maybe I've done that, and now that I've added it, what if I want to start getting harsher contrast and clumping areas up? We're kind of like refining it more and more. I got secondary texture detail. Now let's just like increase the contrast so it's much more defined of like there's pieces missing. This is a great time to show you guys some of the filters and how these this levels works. Now, I'm going to save this before I do this because this has crashed numerous times for me. Okay, we're going to try levels. I'm going to click on this, go up here, add levels, cross my fingers. It didn't crash. It's a great day. Okay. This thing is notorious for crashing my project for some reason. So I have a levels layer here, and you've all seen this before in Photoshop. Sliders are black point, gamma, white point, lift, gain. I want to increase contrast. So let me just kind of click on this. I'm just going to go to my display real quick and just fade this out. Okay. If I want to make this harsher, when I click on the levels, what I need to do is move the black point over and move white point over. I'm clipping them together. Gamma is kind of like the midtone. It's like how it bends between the two. So maybe we'll do something like this. And if I click back, you can see now it's a harsher variation to it. So maybe now we have this set up, but you want to start having the color be adjusted. Now I could go in there and do this. Actually, let's do something more complicated because this is easy to change the color. That's literally me clicking on that and picking a new color. What if the wood is the wrong color? I'm just kind of throwing out different scenarios. You have an art director say he's digging the wood. He just wishes you had done maybe a different tone with it. And I don't, this one probably has color controls. Let's pretend this doesn't exist. Because you know how a lot of these different materials hide and show different things, and you don't have the ability to even affect color at all. It's like, well, I guess this is the way it is. You can still change the color. Like if you guys were in Photoshop, how could you take a texture and change the color to something in Photoshop? Like make it warmer or cooler? Yeah, hue saturation. That's a really popular one to use. That is in Painter. So these are where like a lot of the different filters come in. So what I'm going to do is I'm clicking on my wood material. Okay, I'm going to go up here, and you'll kind of notice when you click on different things, like if I want to group certain different like groupings or layers and masks will sort of hide and show different things. You can't put a filter on the group. It wants to be applied to the mask or the color. So if I click on this, we're going to go up here. I'm going to do filter. And you'll see when you drop a filter on it, it looks almost like any time we've dropped in like these random paint and like fill layers. It's just kind of hanging out below what we're doing it on. We'll click on it. Looks like the generator, right? It's waiting for you to pick what type of filter you want. So I'll click it, and let me zoom in here so you can see this. This is again going to look terrible in the recording, but There's a bunch of different filters you can do. Now, I haven't really tried all of these out, and I'm not going to run through every single one of them. But we all know what a blur does. Like, you put a blur on it, you're blurring that material. Some of these are probably going to work for the mask. Let's kind of go down, though, and we might try using HSL. There's also an invert. You ever want to just flip your colors and invert something you've built? There's an invert effect in here. And even though we're not going to use it, there's a really cool one in here somewhere. Where, not matte, not weathering. There's a height. Okay, this guy. There's this thing called height blend. This is also in Designer. I'm just going to kind of sidetrack here real quick. This is one of the coolest things I've seen in Designer, which is another software by Algorithmic. There's probably a video on it. Yeah, I'm not gonna like use the audio here, but so this is Designer, and you can use these things called height blends to control like where two different materials layer together. It's almost like if you, let's say you had like a really cool ground terrain set up, you know how there's going to be a lot of height variation. At the low point of the ground, isn't that where you'd see like water start to pool up, right? So if you built like a water material separately and then a ground material, they both have their own height data. There's a bunch of tools in Designer and Painter where you can use a height effect to actually control the level that they blend. And you'll actually see water sit in the puddle, and as you raise the height, it'll start raising up and eventually bleed over the ground and terrain until you have like a flood, and there's rocks underneath it. So that's in Painter. I haven't really messed around with it enough in Painter to kind of give you guys a demo on it, but I've used this a bunch in Designer, but that's also in here. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I just got excited about height blending. So let me go here and pick the HSL perspective. Now, when I click on the HSL perspective, you can see it's assigned. Notice how this filter will tell you what it's supposed to affect. It's assuming you're trying to do the color, and that really is what I'm going to affect here. So I have hue, saturation, lightness. If I move it, you can see I'm now adjusting the color of the wood. So if I want to do, I could make it just a little warmer, maybe bring down the lightness a little bit. Kind of fade out the saturation. So now we're getting a different type of wood. Let me bring that up a little bit more. So I want mine to be faded. Now in this case here, what if I want the color variation to be more erratic, where it's not just flat, because this is like applying it across the whole thing, right? The entire wood surface is flat. Do you guys think you know how you could make this type of wood mix with the other one? So it's actually like different pieces have different tones. Yeah, make a paint layer, but because this is assigned to the material, it's almost like I'm saying there needs to be two versions of the material, like one is lighter and one is like the original. Yeah, like I was doing this quite a bit for some of the materials I did in the scene, where I would get something to work a certain way, and I almost like I want to put a mask on this guy, is what I'm trying to do. And you'll notice I can't do it. I can't put a mask on the filter. But on the wood, couldn't I duplicate that and make like a different version of the wood and then use a mask to remove it? So I could do something like, maybe we'll leave this guy the way it is. Actually, what I'm going to do is make this a little lighter, like that. I'm going to click on the wood, duplicate it. So these both have the filter on it now. We'll call this wood original. This will be light. I'm just making a lighter version sitting on top of the other one. Let me darken this. I'm actually going to get rid of the HSL on that one. So this one sitting on top of that one, it's just a copy. On this, if I go in there, I could do something like a mask on this new material, black mask, so it's not visible, but on the mask, if I go in here, I could add a whoops, generator. And let's do the metal edgeware. And you can see now we're almost creating like this worn edge detail where it's exposing like drier wood potentially underneath, like if there was like a finish on it or something. Yeah, just look at that real quick. Okay. And I can just go in there if it's a little bit too much, just fade out the opacity on that guy. So it's a little more of a subtle effect. Sometimes subtlety is the key because it's so easy just to blanket these really crazy intense textures in Painter. So I'm always battling that and trying to fade things back out. Okay. Let me see if there's any more filters I wanted to show you guys real quick, because there are a couple other really cool ones in here. Let's double check this. No, not mirroring. Yeah, these other ones actually aren't too important. We're not going to worry about that. So we're kind of getting near the end. I think I'm just going to show you guys the documentation one more time here. And I want to show you the different things we're going to be expecting you guys to look at. This one is going to be kind of tricky because there's a lot of different effects on the scraper to get this to match. And you'll kind of notice near the bottom, I'm listing out the numerous things we're looking for that hopefully you guys can figure out. The big one is obviously making sure the plastic, rust and metal are in the right spots. Like at least get the materials to look correct for the base layers there. Then you're adding in like dirt, dust, scratches, roughness and height variation like you've done before. There is going to be beveled text. So you've done that a couple times. So the scraper handle does have text. You could either use the font tool like we've done before and with a brush and just like type in what you want and just paste it. Or what you could do is go into Photoshop and pull some of the reference photos, and you could like type in the text in Photoshop and save that out as a different black and white image. There's also paint splatters, and there's also a really thin seam that's kind of running down the side of the handle. So this is going to be one of those objects where you really need to look through the reference photos to see everything. And we have a couple on the side which are really good. Like look at all this little damage in here. Even on like the lip right there, like the plastic's all beat up. You can see where it's like bleeding over the rust a little bit. And one thing I like, I didn't even do this on mine, but I'm probably going to go back there and add it. I love this on the back where that metal piece is sticking out, where it's all like corroded. You can see like rust and other things are like bleeding over the plastic. This thing's in rough shape. And on the side, look at that. What's that line right there? Yeah, there's two pieces to it. That's where it splits apart. So there are two different objects. So when you guys start doing your paint and look at the reference, what material property will we need to do that line that's like breaking up? Because that's not in the geometry. Like what would that be, that line?
It's like
Yeah. Oh yeah, curve to like get like texture detail there. We also need to get height somehow. It's just like a long line. So just, you can use a paint. Remember that little shift trick we were doing? Like you click, hold shift, and it kind of draws that straight line. Use your brush, try to paint a black and white mask, like a white line shooting up, drop the height down so it makes this little indent. And from there, you could probably use that to do like edgeware and stuff if you want to like break up details around it. So there is that little line. And the top's a little hard to see. There's some text in here. I'm not really going to nitpick this too much if you guys can't read all the text and figure out what it says. Try to do the best you can. Look at it. I think, Kobe, didn't you find the scraper?
I did. If you look close enough at the actual model, you can see a couple letters.
Yeah.
And
I think the other side.
Is it the other one?
Yeah.
That's the other side.
you can see a couple of letters. And so I looked at paint scrapers until I found the exact one. And so I modeled it as it was completely clean, and I just detracted from it.
You just be awesome.
There, yeah, there's. I'll show you guys the scraper. Do you remember what you typed in to find it, Kobe? Was it like the part number?
You know, I think I still have the mask on my desktop somewhere.
You guys might be able to figure this out because I didn't even think of doing this. He went to Google. I think he found like the part or like the manufacturing information on the handle, typed it in, and he found like the clean version of it. You can still buy it.
Do you have the scraper with you?
I don't have it. I'll bring it into the lab. I meant to show you guys because I have the scraper and the pulley hanging out on my desk. I'll bring them into the lab and show you guys. But if you guys can find the actual real model, you could just take the image in Photoshop and like rip the text right from it and turn that into like a mask or like an alpha inside of Painter. HY.
That doesn't sound right. There is an H in it. It was like HMF. Actually, let me just pull up my scraper and take off all my masks.
Yeah, I can't believe you found it. Like the actual scraper.
I have no life. I'm actually dead inside.
Well, that's good. Just for the recording, in case you guys didn't get that, in future VSD classes, Kobe's dead inside.
Hyde, Hyde.
HYDE. We're about to find the original scraper. Yep. It's so hard to see, but that is actually on one of the sides. You'd never know it because it's so beat up at this point, but this is it. There's the clean scraper. This thing has had a rough life, apparently. It's gone through hell, but there it is. So if you guys want to get creative and find that original photo of that thing and try to rip it from that, just kind of be careful because obviously the one we're using in this scene is pretty beat up. Use the alpha, but then layer in some like procedurals and grunges to break it up so it's not that same original sharp logo. So that's what you guys are going to be working on today. Just see if you can get really close. I'm feeling pretty good about this one. And if you guys are on a roll, since I do have the activity kind of open, you are more than welcome to try jumping ahead into this guy. Or go back and keep refining other areas that you maybe didn't quite get to with the wall, the books. The pulley is going to be very similar. This one I have a couple pretty cool tricks I'm going to show you guys with anchor points. This is one of the most powerful things in Painter. We're going to use anchor points and ID maps to make like RGB different channels to control the texture. You've probably seen ID maps before. Where is it? Come on. Does this stuff look familiar? Those like solid red, green, blue looking things? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's in there. We're going to be generating these ID maps out of Maya and then using those inside of Painter to kind of like control where certain things should be showing up. Because sometimes it's easier to do it this way instead of trying to hand paint over certain areas to get it to look right. So this will be ID maps. And then near the end there, we'll start getting into anchor points to get like super like fine detail. All right. So that's it. You guys are working on the scraper today. That's it for the lecture. We will see you guys in the lab at 5:45.